Princess Zara lived in a beautiful crystal palace that floated high above the purple mountains of Altara Prime. From her bedroom window, she could see 3 golden suns rising each morning, painting the sky in colors that no human eye had ever witnessed. But despite all this beauty around her, Zara felt more alone than anyone could imagine. You see, Zara was different from other Altarian royals. She was born with a condition that made her legs weak, so she needed special technology to help her move around. Her mobility chair was made from the finest materials in the galaxy. It could hover, climb stairs, and even fly short distances. The chair was actually quite amazing, but to the people of her world, it marked her as imperfect. On Altara Prime, being physically perfect wasn't just nice to have, it was everything. The royal family was expected to be flawless in every way. Strong, tall, graceful, and without any physical challenges. Zara's father, Emperor Thane, loved his daughter dearly. But even he worried about how their people saw her. Every few months, noble families from across the galaxy would visit their palace. Young princes would arrive in fancy ships, dressed in their finest clothes, hoping to win Zara's hand in marriage. These political marriages were common among royal families. They helped create strong bonds between different worlds. But something always happened during these visits. The moment these princes saw Zara's mobility chair, their smiles would fade. They would make polite conversation for a few minutes, but their eyes would dart around the room, looking for any excuse to leave. Some would whisper to their advisors. Others would suddenly remember urgent business elsewhere. Zara had gotten used to this rejection. She would sit quietly during formal dinners, listening to talk about trade agreements and military alliances, knowing that none of these important visitors saw her as a real option for marriage. They saw her as the emperor's disabled daughter, someone to be polite to, but never someone to seriously consider as a life partner. The worst part wasn't even the rejection itself. It was how people acted like her mind didn't work just because her legs needed help. Zara was actually brilliant. She spoke 7 different galactic languages fluently. She had studied advanced mathematics, stellar navigation, and diplomatic theory. She could solve complex political problems that left seasoned advisors scratching their heads. But when princes visited, they rarely asked for her opinions. They didn't want to hear her ideas about improving trade routes or her thoughts on interplanetary law. They saw the chair first, and that was all they saw. During one particularly difficult visit, a prince from the Centauri system had been especially rude. He had actually asked her father if Zara might be happier living quietly in the countryside, away from royal duties, as if her disability meant she couldn't handle responsibility that night. Zara sat alone in her favorite spot, a balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The bioluminescent flowers below glowed softly in the darkness, creating patterns that shifted like living artwork. She often came here to think when the loneliness felt too heavy to bear. Her personal assistant, an elderly Altarian named Kex, found her there around midnight. Kex had been with the royal family for decades and had watched Zara grow from a curious child into a wise young woman. "Your Highness," Kex said gently, settling onto a nearby bench. "You missed dinner again?" Zara sighed. "I wasn't hungry. Besides, Prince Valdor made it clear he wasn't interested in anything I had to say." "Prince Valdor is a fool," Kex replied firmly. "Anyone with half a brain can see that you're twice as smart as he is." "But that doesn't matter, does it?" Zara asked. "They don't want smart. They want perfect legs and a pretty face who will stand quietly beside them during ceremonies." Kex was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that surprised her. "You know, Your Highness, there are other worlds out there, other species who might see things differently." Zara had heard rumors about humans, a young species from a small blue planet called Earth. They were supposedly quite different from Altarians. Some said they were primitive, but others claimed they had interesting ways of thinking about things. "Father has been talking about some kind of summit," Zara said. "Something about forming new alliances. The humans are coming next." Kex confirmed. Their delegation includes scientists, diplomats, and cultural experts. Very different from our usual royal visitors. For the first time in weeks, Zara felt a small spark of curiosity. She wasn't expecting anything romantic. Those hopes had been crushed too many times. But maybe, just maybe, she might have some interesting conversations with beings who saw the world differently. As the weeks passed, preparations for the human visit consumed the palace. Zara watched servants preparing special quarters that could accommodate human biology, different atmospheric needs, and food that wouldn't poison their unusual digestive systems. Her father seemed nervous about the whole thing. Humans were still relatively unknown in their part of the galaxy. Some Altarian nobles thought it was beneath their dignity to negotiate with such a young species. But Emperor Thane was wise enough to know that the galaxy was changing, and old prejudices might need to be reconsidered. The night before the humans arrived, Zara made a decision. She wouldn't hide in her room like she usually did during diplomatic visits. She would participate in the welcoming ceremonies and the cultural exchanges, not because she expected anything different, but because she was genuinely curious about these strange creatures from Earth. She had studied their basic biology and culture in preparation. Humans apparently came in many different shapes, sizes, and colors. They had only one heart instead of two, which seemed impossibly fragile. Most interesting of all, their societies seemed to have many different ideas about what made someone valuable or worthy of respect. As Zara prepared for bed that night, looking out at the stars where a human ship was probably traveling toward their world at incredible speed, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Not hope for romance or marriage. She had learned to let go of those dreams, but hope for connection, for understanding, the possibility that somewhere in the vast universe, there might be people who could see past physical differences to appreciate what really mattered. The human ship arrived on a crisp morning when all three suns aligned perfectly in the sky. Zara watched from her balcony as the sleek vessel landed in the palace courtyard. Its design completely different from anything she had seen before. Where Altarian ships were all curves and flowing lines, this human craft looked angular and practical, like it was built by people who cared more about function than beauty. The delegation that emerged was fascinating. Unlike the tall, elegant Altarians, with their pale blue skin and silver hair, these humans came in all different shapes and sizes. Some were short, others tall. Their skin ranged from very pale to very dark, and their hair came in colors from yellow to black to brown. Zara had read about human diversity, but seeing it in person was remarkable. The formal welcome ceremony took place in the Grand Hall, where crystal walls amplified every sound into beautiful music. Emperor Thane stood at the center, wearing his ceremonial robes that shimmered like starlight. Zara positioned herself slightly behind him, as was traditional for unmarried royalty. As the humans entered, she noticed something unusual. Most alien visitors would keep their eyes focused on the emperor or the elaborate decorations, but these humans looked around with genuine curiosity, taking in every detail of Altarian culture. Their expressions weren't the polite masks she was used to seeing. They seemed genuinely interested in everything. One human in particular caught her attention. He was medium height, with kind brown eyes and dark hair that stuck up a bit in the back, while the other diplomats spoke in formal, careful language. This one asked questions that showed real curiosity about Altarian society. When Emperor Thane mentioned their bioluminescent gardens, the human wanted to know how the plants created their own light. When the conversation turned to their three-sun calendar system, he seemed fascinated by how they managed the complex mathematics involved. What surprised Zara most was that when her father introduced her, human Dr. Leo Chen, she learned, didn't let his eyes drift to her mobility chair like everyone else did. Instead, he looked directly at her face and offered a respectful bow that seemed completely natural, not forced or awkward. "Your Highness," he said, in carefully practiced Altarian, "I've read about your work on interplanetary communication protocols. Your research on language bridge algorithms was brilliant." Zara nearly fell out of her chair in shock. No visiting dignitary had ever mentioned her academic work before. Most didn't even know she had written research papers. "You've read my work?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. Of course, Leo replied with a genuine smile. It's required reading in our xenolinguistics programs. Your solution to the temporal communication lag problem has saved countless lives. In emergency situations, for the rest of the ceremony, Zara found herself stealing glances at this unusual human. While other delegates focused on trade negotiations and military alliances, Leo kept asking about Altarian culture, art, and philosophy. He wanted to understand how their society worked, not just what benefits it could provide to Earth. 3 days later, the palace was hosting a cultural exchange event in the magnificent gardens. Representatives from both worlds were supposed to mingle and learn about each other's customs. Zara had decided to attend, curious to observe these humans more closely. The gardens were spectacular that day. The bioluminescent flowers were in full bloom, creating natural light shows that danced through the air like living rainbows. Crystalline fountains sang soft melodies as water flowed through specially designed chambers. It was the kind of beauty that usually made visitors stand in silent awe. Zara had found a quiet spot near her favorite fountain, one that created particularly complex harmonies. She was enjoying the peaceful moment when her mobility chair suddenly stopped responding to her controls. The hover mechanism made a series of alarming beeps before going completely silent. This was her worst nightmare. The chair's backup systems should have kicked in, but something had gone seriously wrong. She was stranded in the middle of the garden, unable to move, with dozens of important visitors nearby. The closest servants were at least 50 meters away, and she couldn't raise her voice loud enough to get their attention without causing a scene. Panic started creeping in. How long would she be stuck here? Would someone eventually notice? And when they did, how embarrassing would it be too? Need rescue in front of all these distinguished guests? Excuse me, Your Highness. Are you having some technical difficulties? Zara looked up to find Liu Chen approaching with a concerned expression. Unlike other people who would have immediately started fussing over her or calling for help, he simply stopped a respectful distance away and waited for her response. My chair seems to have malfunctioned, she admitted, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice. The control system isn't responding. Would you mind if I took a look? Leo asked. I'm not an expert on Altarian technology, but I've worked with a lot of different mobility systems in my research. What happened next amazed Zara. Instead of treating her like a helpless victim, Leo approached the situation like a collaborative, problem-solving exercise. He asked her to explain how the chair normally worked, listened carefully to her technical descriptions, and then offered suggestions based on his own experience with similar devices. It sounds like it might be a power coupling issue, he said. Thoughtfully, on Earth, we've seen similar problems with electromagnetic interference. These gardens have a lot of bioelectrical activity from the luminescent plants. It's possible that's disrupting your chair's sensors. Together, they figured out a manual override sequence that got the chair's basic systems working again. But what impressed Zara most wasn't Leo's technical knowledge. It was how he treated her throughout the whole experience. He never made her feel helpless or embarrassed. He spoke to her as an equal, someone whose opinions and expertise mattered. As they worked together, Leo started asking about the garden around them. He was genuinely fascinated by how the bioluminescent plants worked, and Zara found herself explaining the complex biological processes involved. She knew more about the palace gardens than almost anyone, having spent countless hours studying them during her lonely evenings. This is incredible, Leo said, watching the light patterns shift across a nearby flower bed. The way these organisms coordinate their light production, it's like they're having conversations with each other. They are, in a way, Zara replied, feeling more relaxed than she had in months. Each species has its own light language. The blue pulses mean one thing, the green spirals mean another. I've been documenting their communication patterns for years. Leo's eyes lit up with excitement. You mean you've been doing xenobiological research too? That's my field of specialty. For the next hour, they talked about plants and communication and the amazing diversity of life throughout the galaxy. Leo shared stories from his travels to different worlds, describing creatures and cultures that existed beyond Zara's wildest imagination, spoke about a world where the trees sang lullabies to their young, and another where crystalline beings communicated through changes in their internal light patterns. But what meant the most to Zara was that Leo listened to her stories too. He was genuinely interested in her research, her observations, and her ideas. When she mentioned a theory she had about plant consciousness, he didn't dismiss it or change the subject. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions and shared related research from Earth as the afternoon sun began to set. Casting new colors across the garden, Zara realized something wonderful had happened. For the first time in her adult life, she had spent hours talking with someone who saw her as a person first, not as a disability or a political opportunity, when it was time to return to the palace. Leo walked beside her chair, continuing their conversation about the possible connections between plant intelligence and interstellar communication. It felt natural and comfortable, like talking with an old friend rather than a foreign dignitary, as they reached the palace entrance. Leo turned to her with that same genuine smile that had surprised her during the welcome ceremony. "Your Highness," he said, "would it be appropriate for me to visit the gardens again tomorrow? I'd love to learn more about your research." Zara felt her heart skip a beat. "I would like that very much," she replied, hardly believing her own words. For the first time in years, she was actually looking forward to tomorrow. Over the next week, something beautiful began to bloom between Zara and Leo, just like the luminescent flowers in the palace gardens. Every morning, Leo would arrive at the gardens with a cup of earth, coffee, and genuine excitement to continue their conversations from the day before. Zara found herself waking up earlier, choosing her clothes more carefully, and actually looking forward to each new day. Their friendship grew in the most natural way possible. Leo would share fascinating stories about Earth, how humans had learned to fly by watching birds, how they made music by arranging sounds in mathematical patterns, and how their diverse cultures had created thousands of different ways to express love and friendship. Zara told him about Altarian history, their ancient poetry that glowed in the dark, and the complex social dances that her people performed during their triple moon celebrations. But as their connection deepened, darker clouds were gathering around them. The diplomatic summit was supposed to create friendship between their worlds. Several Altarian nobles were making it clear they didn't think much of humans in general. Lord Vex, one of the most powerful nobles in the Empire, had been particularly vocal about his opinions. During formal dinners, he would make snide comments about primitive Earth creatures who hadn't even figured out faster-than-light travel until recently. He questioned whether humans were advanced enough to be real partners with the mighty Altarian Empire. "They still use fossil fuels on parts of their planet," Lord Vex said during one particularly uncomfortable dinner. "How can we trust beings who haven't learned to properly care for their own world?" Zara watched Leo's jaw tighten during these conversations, but he never responded with anger. Instead, he would calmly explain human progress, their environmental restoration projects, and the remarkable diversity of solutions they had developed for complex problems. His patience and dignity in the face of such rudeness made Zara admire him even more. The situation got worse when Lady Kira, another influential noble, began making pointed comments about the royal family's judgment. She never said Zara's name directly, but everyone understood her meaning when she talked about maintaining proper standards and considering the future of our bloodline. "Some alliances," Lady Kira said with a sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes, "require careful consideration of all parties involved. We wouldn't want to make decisions based on emotional attachments that might not serve the greater good." Zara felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, as people were talking about her like she wasn't even in the room, treating her growing friendship with Leo as some kind of political mistake. But the moment that changed everything happened during a private conversation between Zara and Leo in the palace observatory. This was Zara's favorite room in the entire palace. A crystal dome where she could watch the stars and dream about worlds beyond her own. The walls were covered with star maps showing every known planet in their galaxy, and the ceiling could become transparent to reveal the actual night sky above. That evening, Earth's moon was visible through Altara Prime's atmosphere, looking like a small silver coin against the purple sky. Leo was explaining how that same moon affected Earth's oceans, creating tides that had shaped human civilization for thousands of years. It's funny, Leo said thoughtfully, how something so far away can have such a big impact on daily life. My grandmother used to say that the moon reminded her that even distant things could be connected in ways we don't always understand. Zara smiled at that. Your grandmother sounds wise. Carians have a similar saying, the furthest stars still share the same darkness. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. But Zara could sense something different about Leo tonight. He seemed nervous, like he was wrestling with some internal decision. During the past week, Zara had started to notice things about their friendship that both thrilled and terrified her. The way Leo's face would light up when she shared a new idea. How he remembered small details about her research and asked follow-up questions days later. The careful way he positioned himself near her chair during group conversations. Not protectively, but supportively, like a trusted ally. Most importantly, she had begun to see herself differently through his eyes. When Leo looked at her, she didn't see pity or polite tolerance. She saw respect, admiration, and something else that she was almost afraid to name. Zara, Leo said suddenly, using her first name instead of her formal title, had grown comfortable with this informality during their private conversations, but something about the way he said it tonight made her pulse quicken. Yes, she replied, turning to face him fully. Leo took a deep breath, and Zara could see him gathering courage for something important. I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how to say it properly. Her hearts began beating faster. You can tell me anything, Leo. I've been thinking about our conversations this week, he began carefully. About the way your nobles treat you, and the way they talk about humans, and the political situation between our worlds. Zara felt her stomach drop. Was he about to tell her that their friendship was becoming too complicated? That he needed to maintain professional distance for the sake of diplomacy? I know this might sound crazy, Leo continued, his voice growing stronger. And I know there are 1,000 reasons why it's impossible, but I can't stop thinking about something. What? Zara whispered. Leo turned to face her directly, his brown eyes serious and sincere. I've watched how your people treat you. I've seen how they dismiss your intelligence, ignore your contributions, and act like your worth is determined by whether you can walk without assistance. It makes me angry in ways I can't even describe. Zara felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but Leo wasn't finished. But here's the thing, he said, leaning forward slightly. In the past week, I've gotten to know the most brilliant, funny, kind, and fascinating person I've ever met. You see connections that others miss. You ask questions that make me think in completely new ways. You've taught me more about life and friendship than years of academic study, Leo. Zara started. But he held up a gentle hand. I know this is going to sound insane, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know there are political complications and biological differences and a million practical problems. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to know that I'm asking because of who you are, not to spite it. The observatory fell completely silent except for the soft hum of the life support systems. Zara's hearts were beating so loudly she was sure Leo could hear them. Zara, Leo said, looking directly into her luminescent blue eyes. I know your people arrange marriages for political alliances. I know that humans and Altarians have never tried to build a life together. But I also know that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. He paused, gathering his final bit of courage. Will you mate with me? Das. The question hung in the air between them like a bridge spanning two different worlds. Zara felt like time had stopped, like the entire universe was holding its breath, waiting for her response. No one had ever asked her that question before. Not the way Leo was asking it, not as a political calculation or a diplomatic necessity, but as a simple, honest expression of his feelings for her as a person. Leo, she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion, do you understand what you're asking? The complications, the opposition we would face? The fact that no one has ever tried something like this before? I understand, he replied firmly. But I also understand that some things are worth fighting for. You are worth fighting for. Zara looked out at the stars, at Earth's small moon glowing in the distance, and felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in her life, someone was choosing her not because they had to. Not because of political necessity, but because they genuinely wanted to build a future together. Yes, she whispered, so softly that Leo had to lean closer to hear her. Yes, he repeated, hope spreading across his face. Yes, she said more firmly, turning to meet his eyes with a smile that could have powered the entire palace. Yes, Leo Chen, I will mate with you. As they sat together in the crystal dome, surrounded by star maps, showing all the worlds in their galaxy, both of them knew that they had just changed the course of history. But in that moment, none of the political complications mattered. Had found something rare and precious to people from different worlds, who chose to see past every difference to find the connection that mattered most. The next morning brought chaos to the palace like nothing Zara had ever experienced. News of Leo's proposal had somehow leaked overnight, and by sunrise, emergency council meetings were being called on both worlds. The crystal corridors that usually echoed with peaceful morning sounds now buzzed with urgent whispers and hurried footsteps. Zara barely had time to process her own emotions before her father summoned her to his private chambers. Emperor Thane looked like he had aged 10 years overnight, his usually calm demeanor replaced by visible stress and concern. Zara, he said, gently, we need to talk about what happened last night. She had expected anger or disappointment, but instead found worry in her father's voice. He wasn't upset with her. He was afraid for her. Father, I know this is complicated, she began, but he raised a hand to stop her. Complicated doesn't. Begin to describe it, my dear daughter, he said, settling into the chair across from her. Half the Noble Council is demanding that we end all negotiations with Earth immediately. The other half thinks this might be the perfect opportunity to strengthen our alliance while solving what they see as a succession problem.
Yes.
Zara's heart sank. They want to get rid of me. Some do, her father admitted sadly. Lord Vex has been particularly vocal about how this could resolve certain concerns about the royal bloodline. Others, like Lady Mora, are asking more practical questions about interspecies compatibility and the political implications. The Emperor moved to his window, looking out at the gardens where Zara and Leo had spent so many happy hours together. But there's something else, Zara, he continued. Something I saw last night when you came back from the observatory. Duh. Do you mean you were glowing? He said with a small smile. Not literally, though your bioluminescence was certainly brighter than usual. I mean, you looked happy. Truly happy. For the first time in years, you look like the confident young woman I raised, not the defeated person you've become after so many rejections. Tears started forming in Zara's eyes. Her father had noticed her pain all along. Do you love him? Emperor Thane asked directly. The question caught her off guard. In all the political discussions about marriage she had witnessed, love was rarely mentioned as an important factor. I think I do, she admitted. Is that foolish? Love is never foolish, my daughter, but it can be challenging. He returned to his chair and took her hands in his. If you truly want this, if this human makes you happy, then we will find a way to make it work. But you need to understand what we're facing. Meanwhile, on Earth, Leo was dealing with his own storm of reactions. The video call from Earth's Council of Nations had woken him at dawn. The past 3 hours had been a blur of questioning, analysis, and heated debate. Dr. Rodriguez, the head of Earth's diplomatic corps, looked exhausted even through the holographic projection. Leo, I need you to explain this situation very carefully. The entire council is in emergency session, and we're getting reports that half the Altarian government wants to declare war over this. That's not true, Leo replied firmly. It's some of the nobles who are causing problems. But you do understand, Dr. Rodriguez continued, that you've essentially proposed to create the first human-alien hybrid offspring in recorded history? The biological challenges alone could take years to resolve. Leo had been thinking about exactly that all night. Actually, Dr. Rodriguez, I've been reviewing the preliminary compatibility studies that both our worlds conducted before these negotiations began. The genetic differences are significant, but not impossible to overcome with current medical technology. What Leo didn't mention was that he had spent the early morning hours researching every scientific paper he could find about interspecies relationships. The biological challenges were real, but so were the potential solutions. Back on Altara Prime, the Noble Council was holding its own emergency session. The Great Council Chamber, with its soaring crystal arches and floating platforms, had never seen such heated debate. Lord Vex was on his feet, his voice carrying across the chamber with aristocratic authority. This is exactly what happens when we allow emotional decisions to override proper judgment. The princess has been influenced by this human's exotic charm, and now she thinks she can just ignore thousands of years of royal tradition. Tradition? Lady Mora challenged from her platform. What tradition says that our princess should remain unmarried and childless, simply because she needs mobility assistance? At least this human sees her value. Her value? Lord Vex's voice dripped with disdain. What value is there in producing offspring that might not even survive? What value is there in weakening our bloodline with primitive DNA? Primitive. Another voice joined the debate. Lord Kale, one of the younger nobles, floated his platform closer to the center. These humans have achieved remarkable things with limited resources. Their creativity and adaptability might actually strengthen our bloodline, not weaken it. The debate raged for hours, with opinions divided not just on political lines, but on fundamental questions about what made someone worthy of respect and love. Meanwhile, Zara and Leo managed to steal a few precious hours together in the gardens, trying to find calm in the center of the storm surrounding them. They sat by the same fountain where they had first really connected, watching the bioluminescent flowers respond to their emotions with shifting patterns of light. "Are you having second thoughts?" Zara asked quietly. "About you?" "Never," Leo replied immediately. "About the complications we're facing." Every few minutes, Zara laughed despite her anxiety. "That's honest. I've been thinking about something." "My grandfather told me once," Leo said, picking up a fallen flower that continued to glow in his palm. "He said that the most important decisions in life usually feel impossible at first, because anything worth doing requires you to become someone you've never been before." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe the reason this feels so scary to everyone is because it's actually important. Maybe we're not just talking about two people getting married. Maybe we're talking about proving that love can exist across any difference." That evening, both governments announced that formal discussions would continue for another week. Privately, the real negotiations were happening in smaller groups. As practical people on both sides tried to figure out how to make the impossible work, Dr. Chen, Leo's father, and a respected physician on Earth, had volunteered to lead a medical team to study the biological compatibility questions. Similarly, Altarian scientists were preparing detailed analyses of the genetic and physiological challenges involved. Emperor Thane found himself in the unusual position of defending his daughter's choice to nobles, who had previously criticized him for not finding her a suitable husband. The irony wasn't lost on him, but his priority was clear. His daughter's happiness mattered more than political convenience. Late that night, as both worlds buzzed with debate and analysis, Zara and Leo met secretly on her balcony overlooking the gardens. The familiar comfort of the glowing flowers and singing fountains helped calm their racing thoughts. "Whatever happens," Leo said, taking her hand carefully, "I want you to know that asking you that question was the best decision I've ever made. Even if both our worlds decide we're completely crazy," especially then, Leo smiled, because that would mean we're fighting for something that actually matters. As they sat together under alien stars, both of them knew that the next few days would determine not just their future, but possibly the future relationship between their two worlds. The question was no longer just whether they could be together, but whether love could triumph over fear, prejudice, and the weight of history itself. 3 weeks of intense negotiations had passed since that unforgettable night in the observatory. The palace had become a hub of activity like never before, with scientists, diplomats, medical experts, and cultural advisors working around the clock to address every possible concern about Leo and Zara's unprecedented union. Dr. Chen, Leo's father, had arrived from Earth with a team of the planet's best genetic specialists. Working alongside Altarian medical experts, they had made breakthrough discoveries about biological compatibility that surprised everyone. While there were challenges, the differences between human and Altarian biology were not as impossible to overcome as many had feared. The preliminary results are actually quite encouraging, Dr. Chen announced during a joint scientific presentation. Both species share more genetic foundation than we initially expected. With careful medical support, a successful union is not just possible, it's probable. But the real turning point came from an unexpected source. Lady Mora, who had initially been skeptical of the whole arrangement, had spent weeks studying human culture and history. What she discovered changed her mind completely. "I have reviewed hundreds of human historical records," she announced during a crucial council meeting. "This species has a remarkable pattern of overcoming differences that seem impossible. They have united people across different colors, cultures, languages, and beliefs. Perhaps we Altarians, who pride ourselves on being advanced, could learn something from their approach to diversity." The breakthrough moment arrived when Princess Zara herself requested to address both governments directly. No one had expected this. Royal protocol usually kept such decisions in the hands of emperors and councils. But Zara had found her voice, and she was determined to use it. The joint assembly was held in the Grand Hall, with holographic connections allowing representatives from Earth to participate in real time. Delegates from dozens of other worlds had also requested permission to observe. Sensing that this moment might change the entire galaxy, Zara positioned her mobility chair at the center of the hall, looking out at the sea of faces, some supportive, some skeptical, all curious about what she would say. Leo sat in the human delegation section, offering her an encouraging smile that gave her strength. "Honored delegates," Zara began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's crystal acoustics. "3 weeks ago, a human asked me a simple question that has apparently shocked both our worlds. He asked if I would mate with him." Few murmurs rippled through the assembly, but Zara continued with growing confidence. "Many of you have spent these weeks debating whether this union is politically wise, biologically possible, or culturally appropriate. You have discussed genetic compatibility, diplomatic implications, and historical precedent. These are all important questions, but I believe you are missing the most important point." She paused, letting her words settle. "For my entire adult life, I have been rejected by potential partners who saw only my disability. They saw my mobility chair and decided that made me less worthy of love, less capable of partnership, less valuable as a person. I began to believe them." Emperor Thane, watching from his throne, felt his heart's ache as his daughter spoke about pain he had witnessed but never fully understood. "But Dr. Leo Chen saw something different," Zara continued. "He saw my research, my ideas, my dreams for the future. He saw my curiosity about other worlds and my passion for understanding different cultures. He saw me as a complete person, not as a disability with a person attached." The hall was completely silent now, even the most skeptical delegates. Listening intently? "The question is not whether a human and an Altarian can mate," Zara said firmly. "The question is whether we will choose love over fear, understanding over prejudice, and hope over the limitations that others try to place on us." She turned slightly to look at Leo, her voice becoming softer, but no less determined.
"Dr. Chen
asked me to mate with him not because he felt sorry for me, not because it would benefit his career or his planet, but because he believes I am worth loving exactly as I am. In return, I choose him because he has shown me what it means to be seen, valued, and respected." The princess turned back to address the full assembly. "If you approve this union, you will not just be allowing two people to find happiness together. You will be sending a message to every being in this galaxy who has ever been told they are not good enough, not perfect enough, not worthy enough. You will be proving that love truly can transcend any boundary." When Zara finished speaking, the hall remained silent for several long moments. Then, unexpectedly, Lady Mora began to applaud. One by one, other delegates joined her, till the entire hall was filled with the sound of appreciation for the princess's courage. The final vote, when it came, was closer than many had hoped, but decisive enough to matter. Both governments agreed to support the union with detailed provisions for medical support, cultural accommodation, and ongoing diplomatic cooperation. The mating ceremony was planned for 3 months later, giving time for both families to prepare and for the scientific teams to finalize their medical protocols. The event would take place on a neutral space station, symbolizing the joining of two worlds in peaceful cooperation. As the weeks passed, Leo and Zara worked together to design a ceremony that honored both their traditions. Altarian bioluminescent flowers would create a natural light show, while human music would provide the soundtrack for their vows. The guest list included not just political leaders, but also scientists, artists, and advocates for disability rights from dozens of worlds. The night before the ceremony, Zara and Leo met in the space station's observation deck, looking out at the stars that had brought them together. Earth was visible as a small blue dot in the distance, while Altara Prime glowed purple against the cosmic darkness. "Are you nervous?" Leo asked, taking her hand in the gentle way that had become natural between them. Terrified, Zara admitted with a laugh, but also excited. "A year ago I thought I would spend my life alone, convinced that no one could love someone like me. Now I'm about to mate with the most wonderful person I've ever met." "Someone like you," Leo repeated. "You mean someone brilliant, kind, funny, and brave enough to change the galaxy?" "Someone who needs help walking," Zara corrected gently. "Everyone needs help with something," Leo replied. "I need help understanding Altarian poetry. You need help with mobility. Our differences don't make us less perfect for each other. They make us more complete." The ceremony the next day was everything they had dreamed it would be, as they exchanged vows in both languages, promising to build a future together despite every obstacle. Representatives from hundreds of worlds watched in person or through holographic transmission. When the ceremony concluded and they were officially mated, the celebration that followed lasted for 3 days. But more importantly, their union sparked changes that rippled across the galaxy. Within a year, 3 other interspecies marriages had been approved. Disability rights movements on dozens of worlds pointed to Princess Zara as proof that physical differences did not limit a person's worth or potential. Universities began offering new programs in interspecies communication and cultural understanding. Leo and Zara themselves became ambassadors for acceptance and understanding, traveling 2 different worlds to share their story and advocate for others facing discrimination. They established research centers focused on adaptive technologies and worked to create support networks for interspecies families. Their first child, born 2 years later, was healthy and beautiful, a perfect blend of both their heritages. Little Alex had her mother's luminescent blue eyes and her father's curious nature. Growing up bilingual and bicultural in ways that would have been impossible just a few years earlier, but perhaps the most important change was the simplest one. Across the galaxy, people who had been told they were not worthy of love began to believe in new possibilities. Parents of children with disabilities looked at Princess Zara and saw hope for their children's futures. Young people facing rejection learned that the right person would see their true value. Years later, when historians studied the turning point that led to greater acceptance and unity in their part of the galaxy, they would trace it back to a simple question asked in a crystal observatory: "Will you mate with me?" But Leo and Zara knew the real magic wasn't in the question itself. It was in the courage to ask it, the wisdom to say yes. and the determination to prove that love truly could overcome any boundary the universe placed in its way.